Hey friends, Michael Warren here from Essential Guitar Lessons, and let's learn all about music theory for guitarists. This is part 11, so make sure you've watched all the other parts before you tackle this one, and I'll put a link in the description for you. Don't forget, if you like this lesson, to subscribe and hit the notification bell, and check out my YouTube channel Essential Guitar Lessons. Lots of songs and lessons for all levels, and new videos uploaded weekly, and I'll put a link in the description also for you. Now, if you have any problems with this lesson, please leave a comment and let me know how you go. So the last lesson we learned about triads and triad inversions, and today we'll put them on the guitar and see how they work. We'll keep it simple and just do the major and the minor triads, and we'll come back to the diminished and augmented at a later date. So a quick recap: the triad was a 3-note chord made up by stacking thirds, and we created them from the major scale. So the major triad was 1, 3 and 5 from the major scale, and the minor triad was 1, flat 3, 5, also from the major scale. Now on the piano this works out nicely. I can just take my right hand, I can play the first note, the third note and the fifth note there. Same with the minor, the first note, flattened third and the fifth, and we do it in that order. And it sounds like a full chord, and we have the lower note of 1 going up a third to the 3 and up a third again to the fifth, so they're going higher as we go along. We can also add the bass note in with our left hand if we want to, and we get a great sounding chord. Now with guitar, this doesn't work out like this with most of the chords. So we'll have a look at the standard major and minor open chords and the major and minor bar chords and see what happens with each one. Now if we're strumming chords on the guitar, we're usually strumming either 4, 5 or 6 strings. We rarely just play 3 strings. Now of course we can, and there's lots of different ways we can do it. But if we're strumming along to a song, we're not normally playing just 3 strings. Now of course we have our power chords, which are used all the time on the guitar, but that's not a triad, and we'll look at those down the track. At the moment we're talking about triads. So let's have a look at the chords where this works. So the C, G and the open F chords. And let's start with C. So we have our standard C chord. The first note we have is C, then we have our E, then we have the G, so the open G string, then we have C and E again. So C, E, G, C, E. Now when we're looking at triads, we don't worry about the notes that repeat. So again we have the C here and the E there, so we don't worry about those. I wouldn't write it out as C, E, G, C, E. I'd just write C, E and G. So that works out nicely. Our C triad is C, E and G. And as I'm playing the chord, I have the lowest note C, then my next note a third up is E, and then a third up again is G, and then it just repeats C and E again there. So it works nicely on the C chord. If we were to do G, our G triad would be G, B and D, and let's have a look at our chord. We have G on the top string, we have B on our A string, and then we have the D. So again, G, B and D. Then we have G, and depending on how you play your G chord, we have the D there, or you could have the B there, and we have the G at the end. So again, that works out nicely for our G chord. G, B and D there, and that's our G major triad. Let's have a look at the F chord. So for our F major triad, we have F, A and C, and we have the same with the chord. We have the F on the D string, we have the A and we have the C, and then it repeats the F again. So again, that works out nicely with the open F chord. So you can see they all work. Now the way the guitar is made, this doesn't work out with our other standard open chords. So let's start with the A chord. So the notes to the A triad are A, C, sharp and E. Now let's have a look at our chord, our A chords. So remember A, C, sharp and E, now they have to have that notes in the chord. So now we have A, this time we have E, then we have A again, so we don't worry about that because that's repeating the first A. So we have A, E, A, then C sharp, and then an E for our open E string there. So that's our A chord, but our triad was A, C sharp and E. But the way we play the chord is actually 1, 5 and 3, not actually 1, 3 and 5. Now if we have a look at the inversions as well, it's not one of the inversions. So our A chord is actually 1, 5, 3, not 1, 3, 5. And that happens just because the way the guitar is made. So let's do a few more. Let's do A minor now as well. So this time we have A, E, A again, then the C makes it minor, and then back to E again. So again it's 1, 5, 3 instead of 1, 3, 5. Our normal A minor would be A, C, E. This time we've got A, E, C. So again 1, 5, 3 instead of 1, 3, 5. Now if you go through the rest of your standard open chords, major and minor, you'll find out the rest of them besides the C, G and the F all are 1, 5, 3, or if they're minor they're 1, 5, flat 3, and you can go through each one and see there. Now of course if you're playing the chords you can find the triad in there as well as a 1, 5, 3, but normally we look at the triad as the root note being the lowest note there. So if I was to look at my A chord, I do have the 1, 3, 5 triad over my A on my G string, then I have C sharp, and then I have E. So that triad is in there, but we don't play the A chord like that when we're strumming along. We're actually strumming from the low A string. So that happens to all the chords. The triad 1, 3, 5 will be in there, but if we're counting from our lowest string, we end up with 1, 5, 3. Now let's have a look at our bar chords as well, because these work out the same. We're just looking at our standard 4 shapes, major and major and minor there. So if I have my G major, my notes to my G triad would be G, B and D. If I look at my bar chord, we have G, this time it's D first, then G again, so we don't worry about that. So we have G, G, D, G, then we have the B here, and then we finish with the D and G again. So again, our major bar chord is 1, 5, 3, not 1, 3, 5. Our minor is exactly the same. You'll find it's going to be a 1, 5, flattened 3 there, but it repeats the G here. So we have G, we have D, we have G again, then we have that flattened third in there, and then D and G again. So again, our minor bar chord with our E minor shape bar chord is going to be 1, 5, 3. Now this works exactly the same for our major, our A-shaped major bar chord there. So we go through that to C, so we have C, we have G, we have C again, then we have E, and then G at the end. So again it's a 1, 5, 3, and our minor is exactly the same. It's going to work out as a 1, 5, 3. So all our open chords except for the C, G and the F will be 1, 5, 3, and same with our bar chords, our standard 4 shapes there, major and minor there, all going to be 1, 5, 3. Now with the inversions, we don't normally call them inversions on the guitar. We use the term a slash chord or a compound chord or an overchord. Now that's not to say all slash chords are inversions. So let's take the second inversion of C, which would be G, C and E. Now as guitarists, we'd write that as C over G, not C second inversion. Now you can write it as C second inversion if you want, but normally we'd write that as C over G. So we'd have our C chord and we'd stick our G as our bass note, and that's our C over G there. If I was doing the E chord and I did the second inversion, it'd be B, E, G sharp. Now we'd call that E over B, and we'd play our E chord, but our lowest note we play would be the B. Now that doesn't mean you can't call them inversions, and you can come up with some cool riffs using inversions, so you can play around with them at home as well. Okay, so what's the takeaway from this? And does it matter? No, it doesn't matter at all. We don't change the shape of our standard chords so they fit the formula. We just play them the same way we always have. I just wanted to point out how the triads work on the guitar because we want to relate that to the theory as well. So let's have a look at the most important thing we need to know about the major and minor chords. When we talk about major chords, we don't usually say major. We just call it the C chord, the G chord, or the D chord, or the F sharp chord. And that always means that they're major chords. Now that doesn't mean you can't say major. I still could say C major or G major, but most of the time we don't. And that's the same when we write it. We just write C or B flat. we wouldn't write the major after it. Again, it doesn't mean you can't, it's just not common practice. So if it's a C or a B, that means it's major. Now when we're talking about minor chords, we say minor, so we know the difference between the two. So it'd be an A minor chord, a G minor chord, a C minor chord, an A sharp minor chord, a B flat minor chord. When we write it, we just use a lowercase m. So A minor, B minor, C sharp minor. So that's pretty easy. So when we talk about major chords, we just say the note and we write it the same. So C, G, D, and they're all major. When we talk about minor chords, we say minor and we use the lowercase m when we write it. Now the next thing we must remember is the only difference between the major chords and the minor chords is a flattened third. So if I was to look at my A chord, so we have the A, the E, A again, and we have C sharp and back to E. So if we flatten that C sharp, so you can see I've just taken that C sharp there and gone back one fret to make it minor. So it's only one note difference there going back one fret. That's the same with E to E minor. If I had my E, I'd have E, I'd have my B, my E again, and then my G sharp, my B and my E. So the only thing I'm going to do is flatten that G sharp to make it E minor. So we go back a fret and that makes it open. So E to E minor. D is the same. I have my D, I have D, A, D and F sharp. My third is the F sharp, so I just flatten that and that makes it minor. So you can see again, if I play the D a different way, I'm only just going back one fret to make it minor. Our bar chords are exactly the same. If I was to play a G bar chord, all I have to do is take that third, which is my second finger, on the G string and flatten it, which makes it the open. So I have G major, G minor, and the same if I had C major, my third is down here on the E, and I just have to flatten that there, so I have C major and C minor. So you can see the only difference is the flattened third, and all minor chords will have a flattened third. So the last thing we need to know is how to work out what is a major chord and what is a minor chord. So if I'm shown a chord on the guitar, or if I'm reading a tab and I want to know what the chord's called, now this can be confusing if you're new to it, and again, it's not a perfect system. Some chords can have more than one name and they can both be right. So let's cover some simple rules. So all chords have a formula like the chords we've done and like the ones we've spoken about. The major, minor, diminished and augmented, and every chord has a formula. We know the major is 1, 3, 5 and the minor is 1, flat 3, 5, diminished 1, flat 3, flat 5 and augmented 1, 3 and sharp 5. And every single chord we use a formula and it comes off the major scale. So if I wanted to find any C chord, I'd use the C major scale. If I wanted to find any D chord, I'd use the D major scale. And that goes for major and minor for all of those. If I wanted to find any G chord, I use the G major scale and so on there. Now we have lots of different types of major and minor chords. We have major and minor 7th chord, 9th, 11th, 13th. We have compound chords. We have major and minor add chords, and the list just goes on and on there. So when we talk about major and minor, we're just talking about the 1, 3 and 5 for the major and the 1, flat 3, 5 for the minor. So that being said, a major chord can only have 1, 3 and 5, and it's okay if those notes repeat, but they can only be those notes. And the lowest note must be our 1 or our root note. So the 1, 3, 5, it has to be the 1, and the notes can repeat. Now it doesn't matter what order the 3 and the 5 come in, as long as 1's the lowest, we could have 1, 3, 1, 5 there, and that's fine. Now if the chord has 1, 3, 5, but the first is not the lowest note, as guitarists we'd call it a slash chord or a compound chord. And we'll get into those down the track, and we'll do an example of all these chords in a minute for you. Now if the chord has more notes than the 1, 3 and the 5, we no longer call it a major chord. If it's missing one of those notes, the 3rd or the 5th, we no longer call it a major chord. So let's do some examples for you. So let's do C major. So we have the C major scale. We bring down the first, the third and the fifth. So we have C, E and G. So that's our C major chord, or we just say C. Now if the notes were C, G, C, E, G, that would still be a C major or a C. We've only repeated the same notes and the C is still the lowest note. So no worries there. So what happens if it's E, C, E, G, C, E? We only use those three notes, so the C is no longer the lowest note. So we wouldn't call it C major or C, we'd call it C over E. Now don't worry about this at the moment, we'll look at slash chords later. We just want to know that we no longer call it C, we call it C over E. If we had G, C, E, G, C, E, again we only use the three notes, but the lowest note this time is G and not C. So we'd call it C over G. So again, don't worry about this chord, we just know it's not C major anymore. Now if we had more notes, say we had C, E, G and B, we no longer call it C, it would be called a C major 7, not C or C major. If I had C, D, E, G, we have added in a note, so we don't call it C, it would now be called C add 9 chord. So you can see if I add a different note, other than the first, the third and the fifth, we don't call it C or C major anymore. If I take a note away, let's say our chord is just 1 and 5, so C, G and C, we no longer call it C or C major, it would be called a C5 chord. Now again, don't worry about the different chords we've spoken about, we'll cover all of them down the track. So let's have a look at A minor. Bring up the A major scale, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp and G sharp. Use the formula 1, flat 3, 5. So we have A, C and E. So if the chord is A, E, A, C, E, that's fine, we only use the three notes and the lowest note is A, so we call that A minor. If it was A, C, E, C, E, that's fine too, the lowest note is A and we only use the notes. So let's have a look at E, A, E, A, C, E. We only use those three notes, but the E is the lowest, so we don't call it A minor. That would be called A minor over E. Again, don't worry about this chord, we'll look at that in later lessons. What if I added a note? So let's do A, C, E, G. That would be called A minor 7, not A minor. If we leave out a note, it's no longer called A minor either. So it's the same as the majors. A minor chord must use the 1, the flat 3 and the 5, and the lowest note must be the 1. So that's the major and minor triads and all you'll need to know about these chords. If you need to, watch this lesson a few times because we want to understand all this theory. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.